The air in the General Hospital chapel was stagnant, recycled, and thick with the scent of antiseptic that no amount of floral arrangements could mask. It was a sterile purgatory for a wedding that felt less like a celebration and more like a tactical maneuver. Willow Tate stood at the altar, her hand trembling in Drew Kane's grip, her skin possessing the translucence of fine china held up to a harsh light. There was no music, only the low hum of the ventilation system and the distant, rhythmic beeping of monitors from the hallway, a grim reminder of where they were. Drew looked down at her, his brow furrowed not with the joy of a groom, but with the frantic intensity of a man trying to hold water in his cupped hands. He squeezed her fingers, perhaps too hard, as if physically anchoring her to the floor, to the moment, to the lie they were sanctifying. The purpose of this union was unspoken, but deafeningly loud to the few witnesses scattered in the pews. It was a shield, a legal fortification. If Willow was Drew's wife, the narrative changed. The district attorney's theory that she had put to bullets in his back to protect her family from his chaotic influence would crumble. Who shoots the man they are about to marry? It was a desperate play, born from the wreckage of their exposed affair and the violent shooting that had nearly claimed Drew's life weeks ago. Willow offered him a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a muscle spasm, a performance of vitality she didn't possess. She swayed slightly, her white dress hanging loosely on a frame that had diminished rapidly in the last fortnight. "Do you, Drew, take Willow?" The hospital chaplain began, his voice rushing, sensing the fragility of the woman before him. Michael Corinthos stood in the back, a silent specter in a dark suit. He didn't object. He didn't storm the aisle. He simply watched, his face a mask of exhausted resignation. The rage that had consumed him since the sex tape played at the Quartermain mansion had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, hollow pit in his stomach. He watched the woman he had worshipped, the mother of his children, pledge herself to his uncle to save herself from prison. He hated it. He hated them. But as he watched Willow's knees buckle ever so slightly, the hate evaporated, replaced by a creeping, primal dread. "I do," Drew said, his voice rough. "And do you, Willow?" Willow opened her mouth. A breath hitched in her throat, a wet, rattling sound. She looked at Drew, her eyes widening in sudden, absolute confusion. The smile shattered. She whispered. Then the strings cut. There was no stagger, no graceful swoon. Willow simply dropped. She hit the linoleum floor with a sickening thud that echoed off the chapel walls. "Willow!" Drew's scream tore through the silence, raw and terrified. He was on his knees instantly, gathering her limp body into his arms. Her head lolled back, eyes half open, but seeing nothing, the white stark against the gray pallor of her face. "Get a gurney!" Now Drew roared toward the open doors, his politician's polish stripped away to reveal the soldier beneath. The chaos was immediate. The solemnity of the chapel dissolved into the frenetic energy of a code blue. Nurses who had been waiting respectfully in the corridor burst in, their rubber soles squeaking on the floor. Michael stepped forward, his legs moving automatically, but he stopped at the pew's edge. He watched Drew lift Willow, her bridal gown sweeping the dirty floor, and run alongside the gurney as it was wheeled out. For the first time in months, Michael realized that the legal battle, the shooting investigation, the custody war, it was all noise. Willow was dying. The trauma room in the emergency department was a blinding wash of fluorescent light and controlled violence. Scissors sheared through the expensive silk of the wedding dress. Electrodes were slapped onto Willow's chest, the heart monitor shrieking a chaotic rhythm before settling into a weak, thready tachycardia. Dr. J. Ashford stood at the foot of the bed, his usually calm demeanor fractured by the data scrolling across the tablet in his hand. He barked orders for blood panels and oxygen, but his eyes remained fixed on Willow's vitals. He had treated her before. He knew her baseline. This was catastrophic. Drew was paced outside the glass sliding doors, his wedding suit stained with dust from the chapel floor. He looked like a caged animal, his hands gripping the back of his neck. Nina Reeves was there too, having arrived from the cafeteria, where she had been anxiously waiting for the ceremony to conclude. She was pressing her face against the glass, her breath fogging the surface, tears streaming down her face in silent, ugly sobs. When TJ finally stepped out, the silence in the hallway was heavier than the noise inside. He pulled his mask down, his expression grim. "It's not good," TJ said, his voice low, addressing the group but looking primarily at Drew and Michael, who had just arrived. Is it the stress?" Nina choked out, grabbing TJ's arm. "The wedding? The police?" Jay shook his head slowly. "We ran a rapid CBC. Her white blood cell count is through the roof, and her platelets are non-existent. It's a blast crisis." The words hung in the air like smoke. "The leukemia," Michael said, his voice devoid of inflection. "It wasn't a question. It's back," TJ confirmed, "and it's more aggressive than the first time. She's in septic shock. Her body has no defense left. We need to stabilize her, but..." He paused, looking at the floor before meeting their eyes. "She needs a transplant. Immediately. The previous graft has failed." Drew slammed his fist into the wall, the drywall cracking under the force. "How? She was fine. She was cleared. She was hiding it," TJ said softly. "Or she ignored the symptoms because of everything else going on. The bruising, the fatigue. She likely attributed it to the stress of the investigation." Drew slid down the wall, burying his face in his hands. The guilt was a physical weight crushing his chest. He had pushed for this wedding. He had dragged her into his political maneuvering, into his bed, into the line of fire. While he was worried about alibis and optics, Willow's own blood had been turning against her. He had been trying to save her from a prison cell while she was rotting from the inside out. "Liesel," Nina gasped, her eyes snapping wide with desperate hope. "Liesel is a match. She saved her before. She can do it again." She spun around, scanning the hallway until she saw the formidable figure of Dr. Liesel Obricht marching toward them. Liesel's face was unreadable, her German stoicism a mask for the terror she surely felt for her great niece. "I am already prepping," Liesel announced, her voice clipping the air. "I heard the code. I have ordered the lab to set up for apheresis immediately. You have to save her," Nina begged, grabbing Liesel's lab coat. "Please, Aunt Liesel, do not let her die because of this mess. Release me, Nina," Liesel said firmly, but not unkindly. "Tears will not generate stem cells. I need to be in the lab." She glanced at Drew, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "And you pray that your selfish schemes have not cost that girl her last reserve of strength." As Liesel disappeared around the corner, two uniformed officers from the PCPD rounded the nurse's station. Detective Chase was not with them. These were beat cops, looking uncomfortable, but determined. "Mr. Kane," one of them asked, "we need to ask you some questions regarding the timing of Ms. Tate's collapse, given the convenient nature of the medical emergency right after the vows." Drew looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "She is dying," he snarled, standing up slowly. "She is in that room fighting for her life. We understand that, sir. But the district attorney is concerned that this marriage is an attempt to obstruct the shooting investigation. If this medical crisis is fabricated, Michael stepped in, placing himself between the police and Drew. His voice was cold, authoritative, the voice of a Quartermain and a Corinthos. "My wife, the mother of my children, has acute leukemia. If you want to verify that, you can subpoena her medical records later. But if you don't get out of this hallway right now, I will have the commissioner down here to explain why you were harassing a family during a medical tragedy." The officers hesitated, glancing at the trauma room where nurses were frantically hanging bags of saline and antibiotics. They nodded once, muttered an apology, and retreated. Drew looked at Michael, surprised by the defense. There was no forgiveness in Michael's eyes, only a shared, devastating reality. "I'm not doing this for you," Michael said quietly. "I'm doing it for her. She doesn't need the police. She needs..." His voice broke. "She just needs to live." Drew turned back to the window. Inside, Willow lay motionless, a machine breathing for her. He placed his hand on the glass, his palm sweating against the cool surface. "I will fix this," Drew whispered to the glass, a vow more sacred than the one he had tried to make in the chapel. "I don't care about the election. I don't care about the charges. I will burn it all down if it keeps you alive." But as the monitor inside beeped a lonely, erratic rhythm, the silence of the hospital corridor suggested that some things were beyond the reach of influence, money, or even love. The Reaper had returned to Port Charles, and this time, he did not seem interested in negotiating. The air in the Spencer Lakeside home was so heavy it felt physical, a suffocating blanket woven from unsaid words and lingering resentment. Outside, the wind whipped off the dark water of the harbor, rattling the window panes, but the storm inside was far more volatile. Carly Spencer sat on the edge of the plush, neutral-toned sofa, her posture rigid, hands clasped tightly in her lap until her knuckles turned white. Across the room, standing by the cold fireplace with her arms crossed defensively over her chest, was Jocelyn. The distance between them was only a few yards, but tonight, it felt like an ocean. The silence had stretched for 20 minutes. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the occasional gust of wind battering the siding. Carly finally broke the silence, her voice low, stripped of its usual fiery defiance. "Joss, please, you have to talk to me eventually." Jocelyn didn't turn. She stared into the empty hearth, her jaw set in a hard line that mirrored her mother's. "I don't have to do anything, Mom. Not after last night. Not after Lucas." The name hung in the air, sharp and painful. The incident with Lucas Jones, Carly's brother, the one person who had always tried to stay out of the crossfire, had been the breaking point. He was safe now, recovering. But the fact that he had been drawn into the chaos of Carly's world was a transgression Jocelyn couldn't forgive. "I never wanted him involved," Carly said, the desperation leaking into her tone. She leaned forward, her blue eyes pleading with her daughter's rigid back. "You know I would never." "But it happens," Jocelyn snapped, finally spinning around. Her eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a mixture of exhaustion and fury. "It always happens. You say you're sorry, you say it's over, and then someone else gets hurt. First, it was Morgan, then Jason, now Lucas. It's like a disease, Mom, and you just keep spreading it." Carly flinched as if she'd been slapped. The truth in Jocelyn's words was a jackknife, but Carly pushed through the pain, driven by the terrifying possibility of losing her daughter's trust forever. She stood up, taking a tentative step forward, her hands open in supplication. "I know," Carly whispered, her voice trembling. "I know I can't undo the past. I can't scrub the stains out of this family's history. But I am trying, Joss. I am trying so hard to sever those ties, to keep us safe. I need you to see that. I need you to accept that I am sorry, more than I can ever say." The raw vulnerability in Carly's voice seemed to chip away at Jocelyn's armor. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the anger in her eyes softening into a profound sadness. She looked at her mother, really looked at her, and saw the toll the years had taken. The fear, the guilt, the exhaustion. "Mom," Jocelyn started, her voice cracking. She never finished the sentence. The sound of shattering glass from the kitchen was deafening, an explosion that tore through the emotional quiet of the room. Before either woman could process the noise, the heavy oak door to the living room was kicked open with brutal force. A figure lunged into the dim light. He was dressed entirely in black, a nondescript hoodie pulled up, and his face was hidden behind a grotesque, smooth white mask, the kind that revealed nothing, offering only blank, soulless staring eyes. Carly's instincts, honed by decades of living on the edge of the mob world, kicked in instantly. She didn't scream. She moved. "Joss, run!" Carly shouted, shoving her daughter behind the sofa as she threw herself into the path of the intruder. The attacker didn't hesitate. He moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency, closing the gap between them into strides. He raised a gloved fist and struck Carly hard across the face. The force of the blow sent her reeling back, crashing into the coffee table. Pain exploded behind her eyes, hot and blinding. but she scrambled to her feet, adrenaline flooding her system. Who is this? Her mind raced, cataloging enemies. The Wu family? Pikeman, one of Sunny's old rivals? The man came at her again. He wasn't looking for money. He wasn't looking for jewelry. He was looking to hurt. He grabbed Carly by the shoulders, his grip like iron, and slammed her against the wall. Pictures rattled and fell, glass crunching under their feet. Carly fought back with the ferocity of a cornered tigress. She drove her knee into his midsection, hearing a sharp grunt of air leaving his lungs, and clawed at his face, her fingernails scraping against the plastic of the mask. They grappled violently, knocking over a lamp, the room plunging into semi-darkness illuminated only by the moonlight streaming through the windows. "Get off her!" Jocelyn screamed. From the corner of her eye, Carly saw Jocelyn grabbing a heavy brass candlestick, rushing forward with terror etched on her face. "No, stay back!" Carly gasped, struggling to hold the man's arms. The attacker shoved Carly hard, sending her stumbling, and turned to backhand Jocelyn. The girl went flying, hitting the floor with a cry of pain. The sound of her daughter getting hurt snapped something inside Carly. She let out a guttural roar and launched herself at the man's back, wrapping her arm around his neck and reaching for the mask. They spun in a chaotic circle, crashing into the bookshelf. Carly's fingers hooked under the edge of the white plastic. With a savage yank, she ripped it off. The man stumbled back, his face exposed to the pale moonlight. Time seemed to stop. The wind outside died down. The ticking clock vanished. Carly stood frozen, her chest heaving, the mask dangling from her hand. She blinked, sure that the concussion was making her hallucinate. She expected a hitman. She expected a stranger. She expected a monster. She did not expect Martin Gray. The lawyer stood there, panting heavily. His usually immaculately groomed silver hair was disheveled, sticking to his forehead with sweat. But it was his eyes that froze Carly's blood. The twinkling, mischievous charm that usually defined Martin was gone. In its place was a cold, dead abyss of hatred. Martin. Carly breathed, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Her brain couldn't reconcile the image. Martin Gray, Laura's brother. Martin Gray, the man who made jokes about alimony and ate bear claws at the Metro Court. Why? He didn't speak. He just stared at her, his lips curled into a snarl that transformed his familiar face into something unrecognizable. "What are you doing?" Carly whispered, stepping back, her hands trembling. "Martin, it's me. It's Carly." Jocelyn was scrambling to her feet near the sofa, clutching her bruised arm. She looked from her mother to the man, her eyes widening in shock. "Mr. Gray," she whimpered, the confusion paralyzing her. Martin didn't acknowledge the girl. His focus was entirely on Carly, a laser focus of malice. He took a step forward. "You thought you were safe," Martin said. His voice was unrecognizable, low, raspy, stripped of his southern drawl's usual warmth. It was the voice of a man who had stared into the dark for too long. "Martin, stop. We can talk about this," Carly pleaded, holding her hands up. "Whatever happened? Whatever you think I did? Talk." Martin laughed, a short, sharp bark that lacked any humor. "You people always want to talk after the damage is done. You think words fix the wreckage you leave behind." He lunged again. Carly was too stunned to react as quickly this time. He shoved her backward, sending her crashing over the arm of the sofa. She hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of her. Before she could rise, he was looming over her. Jocelyn screamed, a high, piercing sound that shattered the night. "Mom!" She threw herself at Martin, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him away. Martin swatted her away as if she were a fly. He didn't even look at her. He leaned down over Carly, his face inches from hers. Up close, she could see the madness dancing in his eyes, a fire fueled by a grief she didn't understand. "There is a price," Martin hissed, spitting the words at her. "For everything you take. For everyone you destroy to keep your precious world spinning. The bill is due, Carly." Carly stared up at him, tears of pain and confusion leaking from her eyes. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "You will," he whispered. He raised his fist as if to strike her again, but the sound of sirens cut through the night air faint at first, then growing louder, approaching rapidly. Martin froze. He looked toward the window, the red and blue lights beginning to flicker against the walls. He looked back at Carly one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated promise. "This isn't over," he said. He turned and bolted, sprinting through the shattered back door, vanishing into the shadows of the garden as quickly as he had arrived. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the jagged breathing of the two women left behind. Carly lay on the floor, her body throbbing with a dull, overarching ache. Her cheekbone felt like it was on fire, and her ribs protested with every shallow breath. But the physical pain was distant, muffled by the shock wave crashing through her mind. Martin Gray. It didn't make sense. It was like waking up to find the mailman holding a knife. It defied the logic of her world. "Mom!" Jocelyn was at her side instantly, her hands hovering, terrified to touch her mother in case she made it worse. Tears streamed down the girl's face, washing away the earlier anger, leaving only the terrified child who needed her mother to be okay. "Mom! Oh my God! Are you okay? Don't move!" Carly groaned, rolling onto her side. She reached out, gripping Jocelyn's hand tightly. "I'm okay," she rasped, though her voice was weak. "I'm okay. Did he hurt you?" "No, I'm fine. I'm calling 911, Jocelyn stammered, fumbling for her phone with shaking fingers. She dialed, pressing the device to her ear, her eyes darting to the open back door where the wind was now howling, blowing dead leaves into the living room. 911, please, we need help," Jocelyn sobbed into the phone. "My mom! Someone broke in. He beat her. Please hurry. 1001 Harbor View. Please." Carly pulled herself up to a sitting position, leaning against the sofa. The room spun. She looked around at the wreckage, the shattered lamp, the broken glass, the mask lying on the floor like a discarded skull. She picked up the mask. It was cheap plastic, something you could buy at any party store. But the man beneath it, that was real. It was Martin. Carly whispered to herself, the reality settling in like concrete. The police arrived within minutes. The house was suddenly flooded with uniformed officers, the crackle of radios, and the blinding beams of flashlights. EMTs rushed in, pushing past the debris to get to Carly. Jocelyn stood in the corner, wrapped in a shock blanket an officer had given her, watching as they checked Carly's vitals. She looked small, shaken. The anger she had felt earlier that evening seemed to belong to a different lifetime. Detective Harrison Chase walked in, his face grim. He surveyed the scene, noting the violence of the struggle. He knelt beside Carly, who was sitting on the sofa now, holding an ice pack to her swelling cheek. "Carly," Chase said gently, "can you tell me what happened? Did you see who did this?" Carly took a deep breath. She looked Chase dead in the eye. "Yes, I saw him. I pulled his mask off." Chase opened his notepad. "Who was it?" "It was Martin Gray," Carly said. Her voice was steady, absolute. Chase paused, his pen hovering over the paper. He frowned, a look of confusion crossing his face. "Martin Gray? The attorney?" "Yes," Carly said. Chase exchanged a skeptical glance with the officer standing behind him. "Carly, are you sure?" "It was dark. You took a hit to the head. Martin Gray isn't exactly. He doesn't fit the profile of a violent home invader. I know who I saw." "Chase," Carly snapped, the old fire flickering back to life despite her injuries. "He was right on top of me. He spoke to me. He said there was a price to pay." "Well, look into it," Chase said, his tone placating, the kind used for hysterical victims. "But Martin was seen at the Metro Court earlier tonight. He's Martin. But we will check his alibi." Carly watched him, feeling the cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. They didn't believe her. They thought she was traumatized, seeing things, or perhaps projecting her many enemies onto a harmless lawyer. "Check his hands," Carly said coldly. "I scratched him. Check his face." Chase nodded, closing his notebook. "We will. Let the EMTs take you to General Hospital. You need to get checked out." As they helped Carly up, she looked over at Jocelyn. Her daughter came to her, slipping under her arm. "I believe you, Mom," Jocelyn whispered, her voice fierce. Carly kissed the top of her head, leaning on her for support. They walked out of the house, into the cool night air, leaving the shattered sanctuary behind. Outside, beyond the perimeter of the police tape, the darkness of the woods pressed against the property line. The wind rustled the high branches of the oak trees, creating a symphony of groans and whispers. Hidden deep within the shadows, a figure stood motionless, blending perfectly with the night. Martin Gray watched the paramedics load Carly into the back of the ambulance. He watched the flashing lights illuminate the facade of the house he had just violated. He reached up, touching the fresh, stinging scratches on his cheek. He winced, but then, slowly, the corners of his mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a grimace of satisfaction, a dark, sinister expression that looked entirely alien on his face. He had delivered the message. The first domino had fallen. As the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing into the distance, Martin turned and walked deeper into the woods, disappearing into the blackness, leaving only the echo of his promise hanging in the cold night air.